I stared at the waiter holding my declined platinum card while my husband spoke through the phone. "I locked your credit card," Terrence stated, his voice flat and unbothered. Then his mother chimed in over the speakerphone, reminding me that a respectable wife consults her husband before spending a single dime. I did not cry or cause a scene. I paid the bill with a different card, walked out of the ballroom, and drove straight to my bank. 2 hours later, my phone screen lit up with 65 missed calls. They thought they were cutting off my lifeline, but they had no idea I was the one holding the scissors. My name is Kendra. I am 33 years old and the vice president of operations for a national logistics firm. I was sitting at a table draped in white linen at the annual Historically Black Colleges and Universities Alumni Charity Luncheon in downtown Atlanta. The room buzzed with the sound of clinking crystal and the soft chatter of the city elite. I had just motioned the waiter over to secure a donor table for $5,000. It was a standard networking expense, something I did twice a year to maintain corporate relationships and support a community that mattered to me. The waiter, a young man in a crisp uniform, returned a few moments later. He leaned down and placed the leather folio on the table. "I am so sorry, Mom," he whispered softly, trying to shield me from the gaze of the other women at my table. "Your card was declined." Before the hot flush of humiliation could even reach my cheeks, my phone vibrated in my clutch. It was Terrence. I excused myself, stepping away from the chatter of my sorority sisters and colleagues to take the call in the quiet velvet-lined corridor outside the ballroom. "Is there a problem with the account?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I locked your credit card," Terrence said. He sounded completely calm, almost smug. Before I could process the sheer audacity of his statement, another voice echoed through the line. He had me on speakerphone. "It is about time he did," Vivian, my mother-in-law, announced. Her voice dripped with that rehearsed, aristocratic drawl she loved to use when she wanted to put me in my place. A respectable wife consults the man of the house before throwing $5,000 at a party. You need to learn how to submit to your husband's financial guidance, Kendra. Old money protects its wealth. It does not flash it around like new money. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. Old money. Vivian paraded around Atlanta society acting like a wealthy matriarch of a historic dynasty, attending every gala and hosting lavish garden parties. But the reality was far different. I was the sole breadwinner of our household. Terrence was a mid-level sales manager at a luxury car dealership. He drove leased vehicles and wore tailored suits to project a six-figure lifestyle he simply did not earn. I paid the mortgage on our four-bedroom suburban home. I funded the vacations. I even paid Vivian's country club dues so she could keep up her precious facade. They were bleeding my accounts dry to fund their aesthetic, and now they had the nerve to lock my card to teach me a lesson about submission. I did not argue. I did not yell. I took a slow breath and let the cool air of the corridor steady my racing pulse. "Understood," I replied flatly. I ended the call. I walked back into the ballroom, opened my clutch, and pulled out my secret corporate expense card. The one Terrence did not know existed because it was tied directly to my executive compensation package. I handed it to the waiter, authorized the $5,000 charge, and gathered my designer coat. I smiled warmly at the women at my table, apologizing that an urgent work matter required my immediate attention. I walked out of the hotel with my head held high, tipped the valet, and slid into the driver's seat of my imported sedan. Once the doors locked, the silence of the car wrapped around me. I did not drive back to my office. I pulled out of the valet circle and merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the financial district. The afternoon sun beat down on the windshield, but inside the car, the climate control kept the atmosphere perfectly chilled. As I navigated the heavy Atlanta traffic, the pieces of their sudden financial power play started clicking into place. Terrence had been unusually interested in our joint checking account balances over the past week. He had asked probing questions about my year-end bonus, which had cleared just 2 days prior. I had dismissed his curiosity as normal financial planning. I should have known better. I grew up working class on the South Side, watching my parents hustle constantly just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. I clawed my way to the top of the corporate ladder through sheer grit, long hours, and zero handouts. I earned every single promotion, every raise, and every ounce of respect I commanded in the boardroom. I never trusted Vivian's obsession with image, and I certainly never trusted her suffocating influence over Terrence. But I had compromised for the sake of my marriage. I had opened that joint account to make Terrence feel like an equal partner in a household where my income dwarfed his by a massive margin. I let him manage the secondary bills to give him a sense of authority he desperately craved but lacked the work ethic to actually build. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tightly. That compromise ended today. I would not be managed, manipulated, or put on a financial allowance using my own paycheck. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of my wealth management firm. The polished marble floors of the lobby echoed with my quick, determined footsteps as I bypassed the main teller lines and headed straight for the private client elevators. The receptionist recognized me immediately and nodded me through. My wealth manager, Elias, was a sharp, meticulous man who had guided my investment portfolios and managed my corporate assets for the past 5 years. He knew the exact scale of my wealth, and he knew that Terrence only had access to a very small, tightly controlled portion of it. His assistant ushered me right into his glass-walled office. Elias looked up from his dual monitors, surprised by my unannounced arrival. "Kendra," he said, standing to button his suit jacket. "It is good to see you, but you do not have an appointment. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, taking a seat across from his heavy oak desk and placing my designer bag on the floor. "I need to pull up the joint checking account immediately. Terrence just called and told me he locked the platinum card. I need to know exactly what is going on before I take my next steps." Elias frowned. He sat back down and typed rapidly on his keyboard. The rhythmic clacking of the keys filled the quiet room. His brow furrowed as he scanned the screen. He clicked the mouse a few times, navigating through the transaction history. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to deep concern. He took a slow breath before looking back at me. "Kendra," Elias began, his voice dropping to a serious, measured tone. "The platinum credit card was flagged and locked due to insufficient funds in the linked auto-pay account." I stared at him, my mind racing to process the information. "That makes absolutely no sense," I told him. "My year-end bonus just cleared into the joint checking account on Wednesday. There was over $40,000 in there this morning when I checked the balance over coffee." Elias turned his monitor so I could see the screen clearly. The glaring red numbers on the digital ledger confirmed my absolute worst fears. The balance read 0. "Terrence did not just lock your credit card," Elias said quietly, pointing to a specific line item on the screen. "He drained the entire $40,000 joint checking account. The transfer was initiated at 9 in the morning. He cleared it out to the very last cent." I sat perfectly still. The air in the office suddenly felt thin. My husband and his mother had not just tried to humiliate me at a charity luncheon to teach me a lesson about financial submission. They had stolen my bonus. They had orchestrated a calculated heist on the money I had earned through countless sleepless nights, stressful travel schedules, and high-stakes corporate negotiations. They took the money I brought into the house and then had the sheer audacity to tell me to ask permission before spending a dime. Elias watched me carefully, waiting for the inevitable emotional breakdown. He had likely seen spouses fall apart in this exact chair when financial betrayal was uncovered. But the tears did not come. Instead, a cold, calculating clarity washed over my mind, sharpening my focus. They thought because I was quiet and accommodating in their presence that I was weak. They mistook my patience for compliance. They thought they had trapped me. "We need to secure everything else," I told Elias, my voice devoid of any panic. "Right now." "I locked your credit card," my husband said over the phone, his voice dripping with unearned authority. Then his mother chimed in from the background, telling me a respectable wife asks permission before spending a single dime. I did not cry. I did not argue. I hung up, drove straight to my bank, and uncovered a theft that changed everything. 2 hours later, I sat in my car staring at 65 missed calls from him. They thought they were putting me in my place, but they had no idea they had just handed me the match to burn their fake empire to the ground. My name is Kendra. I am 33 years old and the vice president of operations for a national logistics firm. The afternoon my marriage ended started in the crystal-lit ballroom of a luxury hotel in downtown Atlanta. I was attending an exclusive historically black colleges and universities alumni charity luncheon. The room buzzed with the sound of clinking crystal, the rustle of silk, and the soft chatter of the city elite. I was sitting at a table with some of the most powerful black women in the state, enjoying the atmosphere and preparing to make my annual donation. When the time came for the pledge drive, I discreetly motioned the waiter over and handed him my platinum card to secure a $5,000 donor table. It was a standard networking expense, something I did twice a year to maintain corporate relationships and support a community that mattered to me. I took a sip of my sparkling water completely at ease until the waiter returned a few moments later. He leaned down, placing the leather folio on the table with a sympathetic grimace, trying his best to shield me from the gaze of the other women. "I am so sorry, Mom," he whispered softly. "Your card was declined." Before the hot flush of humiliation could even reach my cheeks, my phone vibrated in my clutch. I glanced at the screen. It was Terrence, my husband of 4 years. I excused myself, stepping away from the lively chatter of my sorority sisters and colleagues to take the call in the quiet velvet-lined corridor outside the ballroom. "Is there a problem with the account?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level so no one walking by would suspect anything was wrong. "I locked your credit card," Terrence stated. He sounded completely calm, almost smug, as if he were disciplining a disobedient child rather than speaking to his wife. Before I could process the sheer audacity of his statement, another voice echoed through the line. He had me on speakerphone. "It is about time he did," Vivian announced. My mother-in-law possessed a voice that dripped with a rehearsed aristocratic drawl she loved to use when she wanted to put me in my place. A respectable wife consults the man of the house before throwing $5,000 at a party. You need to learn how to submit to your husband's financial guidance, Kendra. Old money protects its wealth. It does not flash it around like new money. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air of the corridor steady my racing pulse. Old money. Vivian paraded around Atlanta society, acting like the wealthy matriarch of a historic dynasty, attending every gala and hosting lavish garden parties. But the reality was far different, and it was a reality only the three of us knew. I was the sole breadwinner of our household. Terrence was a mid-level sales manager at a luxury car dealership. He drove leased vehicles and wore tailored suits to project a six-figure lifestyle he simply did not earn. I paid the mortgage on our 4-bedroom suburban home. I funded the vacations. I even paid Vivian's exorbitant country club dues so she could keep up her precious facade among the city elite. They were bleeding my accounts dry to fund their aesthetic, and now they had the nerve to lock my card to teach me a lesson about submission. I did not yell. I did not demand that he unlock it. I knew exactly what kind of power play this was. Terrence constantly felt emasculated by my success, and Vivian constantly fed his insecurities, telling him he needed to take control of his household. "Understood," I replied flatly. I ended the call and walked back into the ballroom. I opened my clutch and pulled out my secret corporate expense card. It was a card Terrence did not know existed because it was tied directly to my executive compensation package at the logistics firm. I handed it to the waiter, authorized the $5,000 charge, and gathered my designer coat. I smiled warmly at the women at my table, apologizing that an urgent work matter required my immediate attention. I walked out of the hotel with my head held high, tipped the valet, and slid into the driver's seat of my imported sedan. Once the doors locked, the silence of the car wrapped around me. I did not drive back to my office. I pulled out of the valet circle and merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the financial district. The afternoon sun beat down on the windshield, but inside the car, the climate control kept the atmosphere perfectly chilled. As I navigated the heavy Atlanta traffic, the pieces of their sudden financial power play started clicking into place. Terrence had been unusually interested in our joint checking account balances over the past week. He had asked probing questions about my year-end bonus, which had cleared just 2 days prior. I had dismissed his curiosity as normal financial planning. I should have known better. I grew up working class on the South Side, watching my parents hustle constantly just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. I clawed my way to the top of the corporate ladder through sheer grit, long hours, and zero handouts. I earned every single promotion, every raise, and every ounce of respect I commanded in the boardroom. I never trusted Vivian's obsession with image, and I certainly never trusted her suffocating influence over Terrence. But I had compromised for the sake of my marriage. I had opened that joint account to make Terrence feel like an equal partner in a household where my income dwarfed his by a massive margin. I let him manage the secondary bills to give him a sense of authority he desperately craved, but lacked the work ethic to actually build. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tightly. That compromise ended today. I would not be managed, manipulated, or put on a financial allowance using my own paycheck. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of my wealth management firm. The polished marble floors of the lobby echoed with my quick, determined footsteps as I bypassed the main teller lines and headed straight for the private client elevators. The receptionist recognized me immediately and nodded me through to the top floor. My wealth manager, Elias, was a sharp, meticulous man who had guided my investment portfolios and managed my corporate assets for the past 5 years. He knew the exact scale of my wealth, and he knew that Terrence only had access to a very small, tightly controlled portion of it. His assistant ushered me right into his glass-walled office. Elias looked up from his dual monitors, surprised by my unannounced arrival. "Kendra," he said, standing to button his suit jacket. "It is good to see you, but you do not have an appointment. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, taking a seat across from his heavy oak desk and placing my bag on the floor. "I need to pull up the joint checking account immediately. Terrence just called and told me he locked the platinum card. I need to know exactly what is going on before I take my next steps." Elias frowned. He sat back down and typed rapidly on his keyboard. The rhythmic clacking of the keys filled the quiet room. His brow furrowed as he scanned the screen. He clicked the mouse a few times, navigating through the transaction history. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to deep concern. He took a slow breath before looking back at me. "Kendra," Elias began, his voice dropping to a serious, measured tone. "The platinum credit card was flagged and locked by our automated fraud department. It was locked due to insufficient funds in the linked autopay account." I stared at him, my mind racing to process the information. "That makes absolutely no sense," I told him. "My year-end bonus just cleared into the joint checking account on Wednesday. There was over $40,000 in there this morning when I checked the balance over coffee." Elias turned his monitor so I could see the screen clearly. The glaring red numbers on the digital ledger confirmed my absolute worst fears. The balance read 0. "Terrence did not lock your credit card," Elias said quietly, pointing to a specific line item on the screen. "He drained the entire $40,000 joint checking account. The transfer was initiated at 9 in the morning. He cleared it out to the very last cent." I sat perfectly still. The air in the office suddenly felt thin. My husband and his mother had not just tried to humiliate me at a charity luncheon to teach me a lesson about financial submission. They had stolen my bonus. They had orchestrated a calculated heist on the money I had earned through countless sleepless nights, stressful travel schedules, and high-stakes corporate negotiations. They took the money I brought into the house and then had the sheer audacity to tell me to ask permission before spending a dime. Elias watched me carefully, waiting for the inevitable emotional breakdown. He had likely seen spouses fall apart in this exact chair when financial betrayal was uncovered. But the tears did not come. Instead, a cold, calculating clarity washed over my mind, sharpening my focus. They thought because I was quiet and accommodating in their presence that I was weak. They mistook my patience for compliance. They thought they had trapped me. "We need to secure everything else," I told Elias, my voice devoid of any panic. "Right now." Elias moved with the ruthless efficiency I paid him for. Within 30 minutes, every stock portfolio, mutual fund, and secondary savings account tied to my name was frozen or shifted behind strict biometric firewalls. I watched the digital screens as my financial footprint vanished from my husband's reach. I rerouted my corporate direct deposits into a newly established private trust that only Elias and I could access. I felt absolutely no remorse. I thanked Elias, gathered my things, and walked out to my car. Sitting in the plush leather seat of my sedan, with a fresh iced coffee resting in the cup holder, I finally looked at my phone. 65 missed calls from Terrence. The notification badge glowed red against my home screen. Before I could even set the phone down, it lit up again. Call number 66. I swiped to answer and placed the device on the dashboard mount. "Kendra, what on earth is going on?" Terrence shouted through the speakers. His voice was frantic and breathless, entirely stripped of the arrogant drawl he had used just 2 hours ago. "My auto pay for the Porsche lease just bounced. The dealership is threatening to repossess the car. My mother is standing right here having a near panic attack because the country club just called her. Her quarterly membership dues were declined. You need to unlock the accounts right this second." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced coffee. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, letting his anxiety peak. "I did not lock the accounts, Terrence," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "The fraud department locked them. They froze everything because someone drained our entire $40,000 joint checking account at 9 o'clock this morning." A thick, suffocating silence fell over the line. I could hear his heavy, shallow breathing as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. He tried to stammer out a response, but I did not wait to hear his pathetic excuses. I tapped the screen to end the call, put the car in drive, and headed toward the sprawling 4-bedroom suburban home my hard work paid for. The drive gave me time to process the sheer disrespect of it all. I had spent years navigating corporate America as a Black woman, having to be twice as good to get half the recognition. I came home to what was supposed to be my sanctuary, only to find parasites disguised as family. I pulled into our pristine driveway 30 minutes later. Terrence's leased luxury car was parked haphazardly near the garage door. I walked through the heavy mahogany front entrance and stepped into the vaulted foyer. Terrence and Vivian were waiting for me in the living room. Vivian was pacing furiously across the expensive imported rug, while Terrence stood rigidly by the stone fireplace. Vivian stopped pacing the moment she saw me, her face contorted into a mask of righteous indignation. She adjusted her silk scarf, preparing to lecture me. "How dare you ignore my son's calls, Kendra?" she snapped, her voice echoing in the large room. "You are behaving like an erratic, ungrateful child. Terrence had every right to secure the family assets this morning. You were ready to throw away $5,000 at some alumni party just to show off to your little friends. A responsible man steps in when his wife spends recklessly. He moved that money to protect our financial future. You need to call the bank and fix this mess you created." I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact. I reached into my designer bag, pulled out the thick stack of bank transaction records Elias had printed for me, and tossed them onto the glass coffee table. They landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "You call wiring $40,000 to a brand new limited liability company securing our future?" I asked her. I walked closer to the table, forcing Terrence to look down at the highlighted routing numbers. "I know exactly where my bonus went, Terrence. It did not go into a high-yield savings account for our family. It went straight into a business account registered to Chloe." The mention of his white sister-in-law's name made the color drain completely from Terrence's face. Chloe was married to his older brother Malik. She was a woman who constantly weaponized her fragility, playing the delicate victim to get exactly what she wanted. Vivian and Terrence had spent years bending over backward to fund Chloe's lavish lifestyle. They were so desperate to prove their elite status and proximity to whiteness that they treated her like a fragile porcelain doll while treating me, the Black woman, actually funding their existence like a limitless automated teller machine. Terrence took a step toward me, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. He pointed a shaking finger inches from my face. "You need to transfer that money back right now, Kendra," he demanded, his voice dropping into a low, desperate threat. "Chloe's Wellness Boutique is closing a massive commercial real estate lease today at 5 o'clock. If she does not have that security deposit cleared in her account, she loses the space. You are going to ruin her dream over a simple misunderstanding. We were going to pay you back next month anyway." I looked at the finger hovering near my face and smiled a cold, hollow smile. I stepped right into his space, refusing to back down an inch. "That is extremely unfortunate for Chloe," I whispered, keeping my gaze locked onto his terrified eyes. "Because I just walked out of the bank and reported that wire transfer as grand larceny." The silence that followed my declaration of grand larceny was absolute perfection. For the first time since I met him, Terrence had absolutely nothing to say. He stood frozen in the center of the living room, his mouth slightly open, staring at the bank printouts scattered across the glass coffee table. Vivian, however, could not handle the silence. She immediately shifted gears from an imperious matriarch to a frantic negotiator. She tried to soften her tone, calling me honey, and claiming that we did not need to involve the authorities over a simple family misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the air. You call committing a federal felony a misunderstanding. I watched Terrence physically deflate. His phone buzzed endlessly in his pocket, a relentless reminder that his financial house of cards was rapidly collapsing. I walked over to the custom linen sofa I had paid for, sat down, crossed my legs, and waited. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Terrence had undoubtedly texted his brother the moment I dropped the word larceny. 20 minutes passed in agonizing tension. Vivian paced the hardwood floors, twisting her pearl necklace, while Terrence stared out the front window, sweating through his designer shirt. Then tires screeched in the driveway. The heavy mahogany front door swung open with a violent thud. Malik and Chloe burst into the foyer, bringing a chaotic energy that instantly suffocated the room. Malik was older than Terrence and twice as loud. He carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him a favor just for waking up. Right behind him was Chloe. She was already in full performance mode. She wore high-end athletic wear, clutching an oversized designer tote bag, and her face was flushed and streaked with fresh tears. Chloe had perfected the art of weaponizing her fragility. She was a master at turning on the waterworks the second she faced any kind of accountability, and my in-laws ate it up every single time. Vivian and Terrence constantly bent over backward to accommodate Chloe. They treated her whiteness like some kind of prize. Malik had won, a status symbol that somehow elevated their own standing in Atlanta society. They coddled her. They tiptoed around her feelings. Meanwhile, they treated me, the hardworking black woman who actually funded their entire lavish lifestyle, like a limitless automated teller machine, expected to carry their burdens without a single complaint. Chloe did not even take off her shoes before she started sobbing hysterically. She collapsed onto the armchair next to Vivian, burying her face in her hands. "Kendra, how could you do this to me?" she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured devastation. "You know how hard I have worked on my business plan. You know what this boutique means to me. You are trying to ruin my dream out of pure spite." Malik puffed up his chest and stepped aggressively into my line of sight, blocking my view of his weeping wife. "You need to call your bank right now and reverse that fraud claim." "Kendra," he barked. His tone was not a request, it was a command. "You are not going to send my brother to jail, and you are sure as hell not going to destroy my wife's business over some petty jealousy. We are family. We protect each other. You do not bring the police into family business." I looked Malik up and down, completely unimpressed by his posturing. "Stealing $40,000 from my bank account is not family business." "Malik," I said, my voice smooth and unwavering, "it is a crime. And doing it to fund a vanity project for a woman who has never held a real job in her life makes it even more pathetic." Chloe let out a loud, dramatic wail, hiding her face deeper in her hands. Vivian immediately rushed to her side, rubbing her back and glaring at me with pure hatred. "Do not speak to her like that," Vivian snapped, treating the grown woman beside her like a wounded toddler. "Chloe is under a tremendous amount of stress today. The lease for her commercial space falls through at 5 o'clock this evening if that $40,000 security deposit does not clear the landlord's account. She has contractors lined up. She has inventory ordered for her wellness center. If you do not drop this ridiculous fraud claim, she loses the storefront and her entire investment is ruined." Vivian stood up tall, trying to summon whatever authority she thought she still possessed in my house. "You will pick up your phone, Kendra. You will call your wealth manager and you will authorize that wire transfer to go through. You are making more than enough money to replenish that account next month. You will not destroy this girl's future because you want to throw a temper tantrum over respect." I did not reach for my phone. I did not raise my voice to match hers. Instead, I calmly reached into my leather work bag and pulled out my tablet. I unlocked the screen and opened a document Elias had forwarded to me earlier that week. "You are crying over absolutely nothing, Chloe," I said, cutting right through her theatrical sobbing. Chloe sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of mascara across her cheek. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice suddenly sharp and defensive. "I need that money today." The landlord was very clear. If the deposit is not in his account by 5, he is giving the retail space to another tenant. My wellness boutique needs that specific location. I tapped the screen, bringing up the official county commercial property registry. I stood up from the sofa and walked over to where Malik and Chloe were stationed. I held the tablet out, turning the bright screen so they could both read the legal document clearly. "You do not need the $40,000 for the lease," Chloe, I told her, watching her eyes scan the dense text. "You do not need the contractors or the crystal-infused inventory either. Because the property management company just canceled your application outright." Malik snatched the tablet from my hands, his eyes darting across the digital paperwork. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his loud voice echoing off the high ceilings. "This says the building is under new ownership. The landlord promised us that space. We had a verbal agreement." "The previous landlord had a verbal agreement," I corrected him, stepping back and reclaiming my personal space. "But he sold the building last week to a blind trust. And the new owner has extremely strict financial requirements for commercial tenants. The new owner does not lease premium retail space to high-risk individuals who fund their security deposits with stolen money." Vivian frowned, stepping closer to read the screen over Malik's broad shoulder. "Who bought the building?" she asked, a hint of genuine confusion breaking through her anger. "Who is running this blind trust?" I looked directly at Chloe. Her fake tears had completely stopped, replaced by a look of dawning absolute horror. She was looking at the corporate signatures at the bottom of the page. The gears in her mind were finally starting to connect the dots. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that did not reach my eyes. "Guess who finalized the purchase of that commercial property last week, Chloe?" I reached forward and tapped the screen one more time, revealing the parent company operating the blind trust. It was the exact same corporate entity that managed my personal wealth portfolios. My name was listed clearly as the primary stakeholder and managing director of the property holding group. "Your boutique is officially evicted before it even opened," I said, relishing the absolute silence that crashed down on the room. "You can pack up your fake tears, your stolen business plan, and your unearned entitlement and get out of my house." The silence in the living room was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that follows a devastating car crash. For a few seconds, no one moved or breathed. Then Chloe completely broke down. The theatrical sniffling she had been doing earlier vanished instantly. Her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the custom linen sofa. Her oversized designer tote bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud, spilling her expensive cosmetics and perfectly organized planner across the rug. She buried her face in her hands and let out a raw, guttural sob. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated entitlement being crushed by reality. Malik reacted exactly the way an arrogant man does when his fragile ego is threatened. He went on the offensive. He stepped right up to me, puffing out his chest and pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You think this is funny, Kendra?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You think you can just play God with people's lives and get away with it? I am going to sue you for everything you have. I am calling my lawyer right now, and we are filing for breach of contract. We are filing for emotional distress. We are going to drag your name through every courtroom in Atlanta until you are completely bankrupt." I looked at the finger hovering near my face. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I actually let out a short, genuine laugh. The sound of my amusement only infuriated him more. I calmly reached down, closed my tablet, and slid it into my leather work bag. "You cannot sue the owner of a building for rejecting a commercial application, Malik," I told him, keeping my voice steady and painfully polite. "Especially when the security deposit you tried to use was funded by stolen money. The police are already processing the grand larceny report regarding that wire transfer. Your wife is incredibly lucky I did not have her arrested the moment she walked through my front door. You have absolutely no legal standing here. You have no contract. You have nothing but the crying wife and a stolen business plan." Malik was practically vibrating with rage. He opened his mouth to yell another empty threat, but I did not give him the chance to speak. I zipped my bag closed and lifted it onto my shoulder. "Before you start worrying about paying a lawyer to sue me, Malik, you need to worry about hiring a criminal defense attorney for your own household," I said. Or better yet, you should probably hire one for your brother. The anger on Malik's face shifted into deep confusion. He blinked, stepping back slightly. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. I pulled my smartphone out of my pocket and unlocked the screen. When my wealth manager Elias and I were tracking down the missing $40,000 this morning, we had to pull a comprehensive financial report on Terrence. Elias is incredibly thorough. He ran a full credit and asset check to see exactly how deep my husband had buried himself in debt behind my back. What we found was fascinating. I looked past Malik and locked eyes with Terrence. Terrence was standing by the stone fireplace looking like a cornered animal. He was sweating profusely. He shook his head slightly silently, begging me not to say the words. I smiled coldly and turned my attention back to his older brother. "Tell me something, Malik," I asked, my tone conversational. "Have you checked your personal credit report recently?" Malik frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together. "My credit is flawless," he snapped. "I have an 800 score. I manage my finances perfectly, unlike some people." I nodded slowly. "It was flawless," I corrected him. "It was flawless until about 6 months ago." I opened the secure encrypted file Elias had forwarded to me right before I left the bank. I held the phone up, reading the bright screen. Terrence could not qualify for the lease on that brand new luxury Porsche sitting in my driveway right now, I explained. His personal credit score was completely destroyed. He had maxed out secret credit cards and missed multiple payments that I knew absolutely nothing about. But he desperately needed that car to keep up his fake image for Vivian and the rest of his elite social circle. He needed to look like a highly successful man. So he used the one thing he had easy access to. I stepped closer to Malik, ensuring he heard every single syllable. "He used your social security number to co-sign the lease, Malik. He forged your signature and used your immaculate credit history to secure a luxury vehicle he could never afford on his own." The air in the room grew heavy and toxic. Vivian let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. Chloe stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second, her tear-stained face looking up from the sofa in pure shock. "That is a lie," Malik said, but his voice lacked the aggressive conviction it held just a minute ago. "He would never do that." I read the lease agreement details out loud, directly from the bank file. I recited the exact date, the dealership name, the vehicle identification number, and the precise electronic signature stamp matching Malik's legal name. I read the outstanding balance and the penalty fees for the autopay that had bounced just 2 hours ago. I offered to hand him my phone so he could read the fraudulent application himself. Malik did not take the phone. He stood absolutely still. I watched the realization wash over his face. The rigid posture of the protective older brother melted away, replaced by the terrifying stillness of a man who had just been deeply and intimately betrayed. He turned his head very slowly toward his younger brother. Terrence was physically shrinking against the stone fireplace. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, taking a small step backward. "Malik, listen to me, man." Terrence stammered, his voice cracking with fear. "It is not what it sounds like. I was going to transfer the lease into my name next month. I just needed a co-signer to get the car off the lot. I knew you would not mind helping me out. We are family. I was making the payments on time until today." The word family seemed to snap the last remaining thread of Malik's self-control. The brotherly unity he was shouting about 10 minutes ago evaporated into thin air. Malik let out a roar of absolute fury. He lunged across the glass coffee table, kicking it out of the way. The heavy glass shattered against the hardwood floor, sending bank printouts flying into the air. Malik grabbed Terrence by the collar of his tailored shirt and slammed him violently against the stone fireplace. The sickening thud of Terrence's back hitting the rock shook the entire room. Terrence choked, trying to pry his brother's massive hands off his neck, but Malik was blinded by rage. He pinned Terrence to the wall, shouting curses and demanding to know how long his identity had been compromised. Vivian screamed at the top of her lungs. The perfect, polished, elite family facade she had spent decades cultivating was completely destroyed in an instant. She dropped Chloe's hand and ran toward her sons, grabbing at Malik's arms and pulling at his jacket. She begged them to stop crying out that they were ruining the family name. She pleaded with Malik to let his brother go, but Malik shoved her away without even looking at her. Chloe began shrieking from the sofa, curling her knees into her chest and covering her ears as the violence escalated. The living room was a scene of absolute chaos. The men were wrestling against the fireplace, knocking over expensive vases and framed photographs. Vivian was sobbing and screaming for help. I stood near the foyer, completely untouched by the destruction. I did not try to separate them. I did not raise my voice to calm the situation. I simply watched the parasites turn on each other and begin to feed on their own flesh. They had spent years united in their disrespect and exploitation of my hard work. Now the truth had finally turned them into enemies. I adjusted the strap of my leather bag on my shoulder. I turned my back on the shouting, the shattered glass, and the crying women. I walked out the front door into the warm afternoon air, closing the heavy mahogany door firmly behind me, leaving them to tear each other apart. I stood in the middle of a luxury ballroom holding a declined platinum card, while my husband spoke through the phone telling me he had locked my accounts to teach me a lesson. His mother chimed in right on cue, reminding me that a real wife asks permission before spending a single dime. I did not argue. I did not shed a tear. I paid the bill, walked out, and drove straight to my bank. 2 hours later, I sat in my car, sipping an iced coffee and staring at 65 missed calls from my husband. They thought they were cutting off my lifeline, but they had no idea I was the one holding the scissors. I am Kendra, 33 years old, and the vice president of operations for a national logistics firm. My afternoon began in the crystal-lit ballroom of a high-end hotel in downtown Atlanta. I was attending an exclusive historically Black colleges and universities alumni charity luncheon. The room buzzed with the sound of clinking glasses, the rustle of silk, and the soft, elegant chatter of the city's elite. I was sitting at a table with some of the most powerful Black women in the state, enjoying the atmosphere and preparing to make my annual donation. When the time came for the pledge drive, I discreetly motioned the waiter over and handed him my platinum card to secure a $5,000 donor table. It was a standard networking expense, something I did twice a year to maintain corporate relationships and support a community that mattered deeply to me. I took a sip of my sparkling water, completely at ease, until the waiter returned a few moments later. He leaned down and placed the leather folio on the table with a sympathetic grimace, trying his best to shield me from the gaze of the other women. "I am so sorry, Mom," he whispered softly. "Your card was declined." Before the hot flush of humiliation could even reach my cheeks, my phone vibrated in my clutch. I glanced at the screen. It was Terrence, my husband of 4 years. I excused myself, stepping away from the lively chatter of my sorority sisters and colleagues to take the call in the quiet velvet-lined corridor outside the ballroom. "Is there a problem with the account?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level so no one walking by would suspect anything was wrong. "I locked your credit card," Terrence stated. He sounded completely calm, almost smug, as if he were disciplining a disobedient child rather than speaking to his wife. Before I could process the sheer audacity of his statement, another voice echoed through the line. He had me on speakerphone. "It is about time he did," Vivian announced. My mother-in-law possessed a voice that dripped with a rehearsed aristocratic drawl she loved to use when she wanted to put me in my place. A respectable wife consults the man of the house before throwing $5,000 at a party. You need to learn how to submit to your husband's financial guidance, Kendra. Old money protects its wealth. It does not flash it around like new money. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air of the corridor steady my racing pulse. Old money. Vivian paraded around Atlanta society, acting like the wealthy matriarch of a historic dynasty, attending every gala and hosting lavish garden parties. But the reality was far different, and it was a reality only the three of us knew. I was the sole breadwinner of our household. Terrence was a mid-level sales manager at a luxury car dealership. He drove leased vehicles and wore tailored suits to project a six-figure lifestyle he simply did not earn. I paid the mortgage on our 4-bedroom suburban home. I funded the vacations. I even paid Vivian's exorbitant country club dues so she could keep up her precious facade among the city's elite. They were bleeding my accounts dry to fund their aesthetic, and now they had the nerve to lock my card to teach me a lesson about submission. I did not yell. I did not demand that he unlock it. I knew exactly what kind of power play this was. Terrence constantly felt emasculated by my success, and Vivian constantly fed his insecurities, telling him he needed to take control of his household. Understood, I replied flatly. I ended the call and walked back into the ballroom. I opened my clutch and pulled out my secret corporate expense card. It was a card Terrence did not know existed because it was tied directly to my executive compensation package at the logistics firm. I handed it to the waiter, authorized the $5,000 charge, and gathered my designer coat. I smiled warmly at the women at my table, apologizing that an urgent work matter required my immediate attention. I walked out of the hotel with my head held high, tipped the valet, and slid into the driver's seat of my imported sedan. Once the doors locked, the silence of the car wrapped around me. I did not drive back to my office. I pulled out of the valet circle and merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the financial district. The afternoon sun beat down on the windshield. But inside the car, the climate control kept the atmosphere perfectly chilled. As I navigated the heavy Atlanta traffic, the pieces of their sudden financial power play started clicking into place. Terrence had been unusually interested in our joint checking account balances over the past week. He had asked probing questions about my year-end bonus, which had cleared just 2 days prior. I had dismissed his curiosity as normal financial planning. I should have known better. I grew up working class on the South Side, watching my parents hustle constantly just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. I clawed my way to the top of the corporate ladder through sheer grit, long hours, and zero handouts. I earned every single promotion, every raise, and every ounce of respect I commanded in the boardroom. I never trusted Vivian's obsession with image, and I certainly never trusted her suffocating influence over Terrence. But I had compromised for the sake of my marriage. I had opened that joint account to make Terrence feel like an equal partner in a household where my income dwarfed his by a massive margin. I let him manage the secondary bills to give him a sense of authority he desperately craved, but lacked the work ethic to actually build. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tightly. That compromise ended today. I would not be managed, manipulated, or put on a financial allowance using my own paycheck. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of my wealth management firm. The polished marble floors of the lobby echoed with my quick, determined footsteps as I bypassed the main teller lines and headed straight for the private client elevators. The receptionist recognized me immediately and nodded me through to the top floor. My wealth manager, Elias, was a sharp, meticulous man who had guided my investment portfolios and managed my corporate assets for the past 5 years. He knew the exact scale of my wealth, and he knew that Terrence only had access to a very small, tightly controlled portion of it. His assistant ushered me right into his glass-walled office. Elias looked up from his dual monitors, surprised by my unannounced arrival. "Kendra," he said, standing to button his suit jacket. "It is good to see you, but you do not have an appointment. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, taking a seat across from his heavy oak desk and placing my bag on the floor. "I need to pull up the joint checking account immediately. Terrence just called and told me he locked the platinum card. I need to know exactly what is going on before I take my next steps." Elias frowned. He sat back down and typed rapidly on his keyboard. The rhythmic clacking of the keys filled the quiet room. His brow furrowed as he scanned the screen. He clicked the mouse a few times, navigating through the transaction history. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to deep concern. He took a slow breath before looking back at me. "Kendra," Elias began, his voice dropping to a serious, measured tone. "The platinum credit card was flagged and locked by our automated fraud department. It was locked due to insufficient funds in the linked auto pay account." I stared at him, my mind racing to process the information. "That makes absolutely no sense," I told him. "My year-end bonus just cleared into the joint checking account on Wednesday. There was over $40,000 in there this morning when I checked the balance over coffee." Elias turned his monitor so I could see the screen clearly. The glaring red numbers on the digital ledger confirmed my absolute worst fears. The balance read 0. "Terrence did not lock your credit card," Elias said quietly, pointing to a specific line item on the screen. "He drained the entire $40,000 joint checking account. The transfer was initiated at 9 in the morning. He cleared it out to the very last cent. I sat perfectly still. The air in the office suddenly felt thin. My husband and his mother had not just tried to humiliate me at a charity luncheon to teach me a lesson about financial submission. They had stolen my bonus. They had orchestrated a calculated heist on the money I had earned through countless sleepless nights, stressful travel schedules, and high-stakes corporate negotiations. They took the money I brought into the house and then had the sheer audacity to tell me to ask permission before spending a dime. Elias watched me carefully, waiting for the inevitable emotional breakdown. He had likely seen spouses fall apart in this exact chair when financial betrayal was uncovered. But the tears did not come. Instead, a cold, calculating clarity washed over my mind, sharpening my focus. They thought because I was quiet and accommodating in their presence that I was weak. They mistook my patience for compliance. They thought they had trapped me. "We need to secure everything else," I told Elias, my voice devoid of any panic. "Right now." The drive to the Oak Ridge Country Club took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like a victory lap. The club was the absolute crown jewel of Atlanta's black elite, a sprawling estate with perfectly manicured golf courses, a grand ballroom, and a strict invitation-only membership policy. Vivian treated this place like her personal kingdom. She had spent decades curating an image of untouchable wealth and old-school prestige within these walls. She believed that because she could trace her lineage back to prominent civil rights leaders, she inherently deserved the respect of everyone in the city. I parked my sedan in the VIP lot, handed my keys to the valet, and adjusted the lapels of my tailored blazer. I did not rush. Power never rushes. My attorney Sterling was waiting for me near the grand entrance just as I had instructed. He was a brilliant, sharp-minded lawyer who specialized in high-asset financial disputes and commercial real estate law. He held a sleek leather briefcase and gave me a brief knowing nod as I approached. We did not need to exchange words. The plan had been set in motion hours ago when Elias uncovered the extent of my husband's financial betrayal. I walked through the grand double doors of the clubhouse with Sterling matching my measured pace right beside me. The concierge tried to offer me a glass of champagne, but I bypassed the main lounge and headed straight down the long corridor toward the executive boardroom. I could hear Vivian's voice before I even reached the heavy mahogany doors. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her tone was a perfect blend of maternal heartbreak and aristocratic outrage, designed specifically to manipulate the wealthy older board members she viewed as her peers. I pushed the doors open just enough to step inside, without immediately drawing her attention. Sterling stepped in right behind me, closing the doors silently. The room was dominated by a massive oval table polished to a mirror shine. At the head of the table sat the board president, Judge Harrison, a highly respected retired magistrate who did not tolerate foolishness from anyone. Around him sat 5 other board members, all prominent, affluent figures in the city. And standing at the opposite end, pacing back and forth, was Vivian. She was dabbing the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the victim with absolute perfection. "She is financially unstable and completely erratic," Vivian told the room, her voice quivering with fake sorrow. "I have tried my absolute best to welcome her into our family, but Kendra simply lacks the refinement our circles require. She does not understand how we do things." Her behavior this afternoon was downright ghetto. She stormed into my home screaming and making baseless accusations. "She is actively trying to tear my sons apart with vicious lies because she is intensely jealous of our family legacy." I stood near the entrance, absorbing every word. Vivian was using the ultimate weapon of the black elite, respectability politics. She was trying to paint me as the loud, angry, unpolished woman from the wrong side of the tracks who could not handle the pressure of high society. She was betting everything on the assumption that these board members would side with a legacy family over a self-made woman. "We cannot have a woman like that serving on our charity board," Vivian continued, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "It reflects poorly on all of us. She is a liability to our fundraising efforts and a stain on the reputation we have worked so hard to build. I am formally requesting her immediate expulsion from the executive committee and the revocation of her club membership." I took a deep breath and stepped fully into the light of the chandelier. "I am afraid you are not in a position to request anything, Vivian." I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the boardroom. Every single head turned in my direction. Vivian's face instantly contorted into a mask of pure fury. The fake tears vanished, leaving behind nothing but raw, ugly hatred. She dropped the silk handkerchief onto the table and squared her shoulders. "How did you get in here?" Vivian demanded, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. "This is a closed executive session. You have absolutely no right to interrupt my grievance filing. Judge Harrison, I demand that security remove her from the premises immediately. She is proving my exact point with this highly disruptive behavior." I did not look at Vivian. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on Judge Harrison. The retired judge did not reach for the phone to call security. He did not look angry at my sudden intrusion. Instead, he looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. He adjusted his suit jacket and glanced down at a thick manila envelope sitting directly in front of him on the polished wood. Sterling had arranged for that envelope to be delivered to the president 30 minutes before my arrival. Vivian, sensing that the room was not responding the way she had orchestrated, took a step toward the head of the table. Her panic was starting to bleed through her polished exterior. "Judge Harrison," she pleaded, dropping her voice back into that fragile matriarch tone. "You have known my family for 30 years. You know the standard of excellence the Henderson family upholds. You cannot allow this aggressive, classless woman to bring her toxic drama into our sacred spaces. She needs to be expelled today before she causes any more damage." I walked slowly toward the table, pulling out an empty leather chair and taking a seat. Sterling remained standing behind me, a silent sentinel of legal authority. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. They were beginning to realize that this was not a simple family dispute over charity funds. Judge Harrison let out a heavy, exhausted sigh. He looked at Vivian with an expression that bordered on sheer pity. It was the kind of look a judge gives a defendant right before handing down a devastating sentence. Then he looked across the long table and made direct eye contact with me. I held his gaze and gave him a single firm nod, giving him the silent authorization to proceed with the truth. The judge reached forward and placed his hand on the thick manila envelope. He slid it slowly across the smooth surface of the boardroom table. The heavy paper scraped against the wood, coming to a stop right in front of Vivian's trembling hands. Vivian looked down at the envelope, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. She looked back up at the judge, the aristocratic mask slipping completely off her face. "What is this?" she asked, her voice losing its theatrical edge and cracking with sudden, genuine fear. Judge Harrison folded his hands together, resting them on the table. "Vivian," he said, his voice echoing with absolute, unwavering finality. "Kendra is not here for an expulsion hearing. She is here to discuss the foreclosure notice on your estate, the one this club is currently trying to buy at auction." Vivian stared at the thick manila envelope resting on the polished mahogany table as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her carefully crafted aristocratic composure shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of my eyes. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. She began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved beneath her expensive silk blouse, and her hands shook so violently she had to grip the edge of the table just to keep herself standing. The air in the executive boardroom grew thick with a tense, suffocating silence. For 2 years, Vivian had been hiding a massive, devastating secret from the entire Atlanta elite society. Her late husband's fortune, the generational wealth she constantly bragged about, had dried up long ago. She had been secretly drowning in debt, taking out predatory loans against her estate just to maintain the illusion of her high society lifestyle. She had been using the money she and Terrence quietly siphoned from my secondary accounts to pay the bare minimum interest on those loans, keeping the bank at bay, month after month. But this morning, when I severed their access to my wealth, they missed the final critical payment. The grace period expired. The foreclosure was triggered automatically, and the country club real estate acquisitions team was always the first to be notified when a neighboring estate went to auction. Vivian's deepest, darkest shame was now sitting under the bright chandelier of the boardroom, exposed to the very people she considered her peers. "That is a mistake," Vivian gasped, her voice barely a whisper. She looked wildly around the room, trying to make eye contact with the board members she had known for decades. "Judge Harrison, there has to be a clerical error at the bank. My finances are perfectly secure." This aggressive woman is manipulating documents to destroy me because I disapproved of her marriage to my son. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply opened my leather bag and pulled out a fresh stack of financial ledgers Elias and Sterling had prepared for me. I stood up and systematically laid the receipts out across the center of the massive oval table, ensuring every single board member had a clear view of the highlighted numbers. There is no clerical error, Vivian, I said, my tone smooth and relentless. And your impending bankruptcy is only the beginning of why we are sitting here today. The board members leaned forward, pulling their reading glasses from their breast pockets. The room remained dead silent except for the crisp sound of heavy paper sliding across the wood. If Vivian simply wanted to live beyond her means and lose her house, that would be a personal family tragedy, I told the board, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I would have let her pack her bags in peace. But she crossed a line that involves every single person in this room. Vivian is not just broke, she is a thief. For the past 18 months, she has been quietly embezzling from this charity's discretionary fund. A collective gasp echoed around the table. An older woman seated to my left, a prominent philanthropist who had previously championed Vivian's charity initiatives, slammed her hand over her mouth in sheer horror. Judge Harrison narrowed his eyes, his judicial instincts immediately taking over as he reached for the ledgers I had provided. Vivian let out a strangled cry. "That is a lie," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "I have given my life to this charity. I have raised millions for our community. You have absolutely no proof of such a disgusting accusation." I looked at her with pure, unadulterated pity. "Vivian, you made the fatal mistake of underestimating my intelligence. You thought because I grew up working class on the South Side that I did not understand how corporate finances worked. You thought you could just skim off the top because your son was managing the books." I turned my attention back to the board, pointing to a specific column on the documents in front of them. Terrence was appointed as the auxiliary treasurer for the discretionary fund last year. It was a position Vivian lobbied heavily for him to receive. He manipulated the quarterly expense reports. He created phantom vendor invoices for charity events that never actually required those services. The funds were quietly routed into a dummy account, and from there they were wired directly to Vivian's personal country club account to cover her extravagant membership dues, her private gala dinners, and her personal styling expenses. Judge Harrison flipped through the pages, his face hardening into a mask of absolute disgust. The paper trail was undeniable. Elias had cross-referenced the charity's public tax filings with the routing numbers Terrence had foolishly saved on his personal laptop, which was linked to our home network. The evidence was bulletproof. We are talking about nearly $80,000 missing from a fund designed to support minority youth scholarships, I said, letting the heavy reality of their crimes sink into the room. When the annual audit was announced last week, Vivian and Terrence panicked. They knew the missing funds would be discovered by external accountants. That is why they drained my $40,000 joint checking account this morning. They were trying to wash my bonus money through Chloe's fake wellness boutique so they could secretly filter it back into the charity fund before the auditors arrived. They tried to steal from my hard work to cover up the fact that they were stealing from our community. Vivian's knees finally gave out. She collapsed into one of the heavy leather chairs, weeping uncontrollably. Her perfectly styled hair fell into her face, and her mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. She tried to reach out to the woman sitting next to her, begging for an opportunity to explain, but the woman pulled her chair away, physically repulsed by Vivian's presence. The woman you all deferred to, the woman who loved to lecture me about respectability and the protection of old money, has been funding her vanity by stealing from the very community she claims to elevate, I said, my voice ringing with finality. Judge Harrison took off his reading glasses and placed them deliberately on the table. He looked at Vivian with a coldness that could freeze water. "Vivian," he said, his deep voice booming with authority, "you have disgraced this institution. You have disgraced your family name, and you have committed a severe crime against this board. We will not sweep this under the rug to protect your feelings. I have already contacted the Financial Crimes Division of the police department. They have the duplicate files Kendra provided earlier today." Vivian let out a loud, tragic wail, burying her face in her arms. She was completely broken, stripped of her power, her money, and her precious status. The elitist fortress she had built around herself had been completely demolished in less than 10 minutes. Judge Harrison turned his attention to me. His expression softened slightly, showing a deep professional respect. Kendra, we owe you a profound apology. You uncovered a cancer in our organization that we failed to see. However, we have a logistical nightmare on our hands. He glanced up at the grandfather clock ticking softly in the corner of the boardroom. The annual Winter Gala is tonight. It is our largest fundraising event of the year. Hundreds of our most prominent donors are expecting Vivian to take the stage as the returning chairwoman. Terrence is scheduled to give the financial address. If we cancel their appearances right now, the rumors will overshadow the entire charity event. The press will have a field day before we can control the narrative. How do you suggest we handle the optics of tonight? I looked down at Vivian, sobbing into the polished wood of the boardroom table. I thought about the sheer disrespect she had shown me for 4 years. I thought about how she and Terrence had tried to humiliate me at lunch this very afternoon. I did not want them to scurry away into the shadows. I wanted their downfall to be as loud and as public as their arrogance had been. I looked back at Judge Harrison and offered a calm, razor-sharp smile. We do not cancel a single thing, I told the board. Let them attend the gala. Let them put on their expensive clothes and walk the red carpet. Let them smile for the cameras and pretend they are the kings and queens of Atlanta. Let them put on a show. Because the higher they stand on that stage tonight, the harder the fall is going to be. I left the country club with the satisfying silence of a ruined dynasty ringing in my ears. Judge Harrison had the financial ledgers safely in his possession, and Vivian was currently trapped in a nightmare of her own making, weeping over the shattered remains of her elite social standing. The drive back to my 4-bedroom suburban home was deeply peaceful. The early evening sky over Atlanta was turning a rich, bruised purple, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of my neighborhood. I pulled my imported sedan into the driveway and parked. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, a towering brick monument to the success I had built with my own 2 hands. But inside, I knew the atmosphere had entirely shifted. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the vaulted foyer. The house was dead quiet. The chaotic shouting from Malik and the hysterical sobbing from Chloe had long since faded, leaving behind a heavy, frantic energy that seemed to buzz in the air. I kicked off my heels, enjoying the cool feel of the hardwood floors against my feet. I walked up the curved staircase, my steps sinking silently into the plush carpet. I headed straight for the master suite. I had a schedule to keep, and the winter gala was waiting. When I pushed the double doors of the bedroom open, I found exactly what I expected. Terrence was in a state of absolute pulled a cheap canvas duffel bag from the back of his closet and was throwing random articles of clothing into it. He was not packing with care. He was shoving designer shirts, luxury watches, and running shoes into the bag with the manic, uncoordinated energy of a cornered animal. He was sweating profusely through his white undershirt, muttering under his breath. He was terrified. Malik was likely out for his blood after the identity theft revelation regarding the Porsche lease, and Terrence knew the bank wire fraud would inevitably bring the police to our doorstep. He was trying to run. He was trying to abandon the massive legal and financial mess he had created, just like a coward always does when the bill finally comes due. He froze the moment he heard the click of the bedroom door closing behind me. He spun around, dropping a handful of expensive silk ties onto the floor. His eyes were bloodshot and wide with terror. When he saw me standing there perfectly composed and holding my leather work bag, his entire demeanor changed. The arrogant, demanding husband who had locked my credit card that morning and ordered me to submit to his financial authority completely vanished. In his place was a desperate, pathetic man trying to save his own skin. Terrence stumbled forward and actually dropped to his knees right in front of me. He reached out, grabbing for my hands, but I smoothly stepped back, moving out of his reach. "Kendra, please," he begged, his voice cracking with manufactured theatrical emotion. "You have to listen to me. I never wanted to do any of this. It was my mother. Vivian made me do it. She told me the charity was going to be audited next week, and that if the missing funds were discovered, the family name would be ruined forever. She said we just needed to borrow your bonus for a few days to balance the accounts. She pressured me, Kendra. She told me I had to step up and be the man of the family. You know how she gets. I did not want to steal from you. I was trying to protect her. I walked past him, ignoring his weeping form on the floor. I laid my garment bag carefully on the pristine white duvet of our king-sized bed. I unzipped the bag, revealing the midnight blue tailored evening gown I had selected for the gala weeks ago. Terrence scrambled to his feet, following me across the room like a lost, desperate child. I love you, he pleaded, heavy tears welling in his eyes. I swear to you, I love you more than anything. We can fix this. We do not need my family. We do not need Vivian or Malik or any of this Atlanta society nonsense. We can pack up right now. We can leave the state. We can start over somewhere else, just the two of us. I will get a new job. I will treat you the way you deserve to be treated. I will never ask you for a dime again. Just please do not let them send me to prison. You are my wife. You have to protect me. I looked at him. I really looked at him, studying the trembling lines of his face. For 4 long years I had compromised my own comfort to build this man up. I had paid for his luxury lifestyle, tolerated his mother's blatant disrespect, and dimmed my own professional light so he could feel like a king in his own home. He had repaid my unwavering loyalty by stealing my hard-earned money, committing federal wire fraud, and attempting to humiliate me in front of my elite peers. And now, at the 11th hour, he was trying to weaponize my love to escape accountability. He actually believed I was foolish enough to throw away my entire corporate career and run from the law just to protect a thief. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned away from him and walked into the massive master bathroom. I turned on the bright vanity lights and began applying my evening makeup. I applied a flawless foundation. I lined my eyes with dark, sharp precision. I painted my lips a deep, rich red. I moved with deliberate, unbothered elegance. Terrence stood in the doorway of the bathroom, watching me in stunned, agonizing disbelief. He could not comprehend how I was so incredibly calm, while his entire world was actively burning to the ground. "Kendra, did you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling with renewed panic as he watched me brush mascara onto my lashes. "The police are going to come. The bank knows about the wire transfer. Malik is going to kill me if he finds me. We have to go right now. We have to get in your car and drive." I finished my makeup, capped my lipstick, and walked back into the bedroom. I slipped out of my day clothes and stepped into the midnight blue evening gown. The heavy, luxurious fabric fell perfectly against my skin, tailored to absolute perfection. I fastened my diamond earrings and reached around my neck to clasp my diamond pendant. I looked in the full-length mirror. I looked like money. I looked like absolute power. I looked like the successful, highly capable woman who actually owned the incredible life Terrence had been pretending to live. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the comprehensive smart home application that controlled every single access point on the property. Terrence watched me, his panic escalating to a fever pitch as he hoisted the heavy duffel bag onto his shoulder. "I am leaving," he announced, trying to summon a final shred of masculine authority. "If you will not come with me, I have to go alone. I cannot stay here. I will not go to jail for my mother." I tapped the glowing screen of my phone. A soft electronic chime echoed through the quiet house as the heavy steel garage doors locked into place. I tapped another button, completely disabling his unique user access code for the exterior doors, the front security gates, and the perimeter alarms. I had installed the high-end security system myself last year, paying for it with my own corporate bonus. I was the master administrator. I controlled the network. Terrence heard the heavy deadbolts engage across the house. He looked at the bedroom door, then back at me, the terrifying reality of his situation finally piercing through his frantic mind. He was locked inside. "You aren't going anywhere, Terrence," I said, my voice completely smooth and dangerously calm. "Put on your tuxedo. We are going to the gala." The ride to the downtown ballroom, in the back of the chauffeured black car, was draped in a thick, suffocating silence. The city lights of Atlanta blurred past the tinted windows, casting brief flashes of illumination across the plush leather interior. I sat perfectly still, facing forward, allowing the quiet hum of the engine to soothe my mind. Beside me, Terrence was physically unraveling. He was sweating right through his custom-tailored tuxedo, his breathing shallow and rapid. He kept shifting his weight, tugging at his bow tie and staring out the window as if contemplating throwing himself into the moving traffic to escape what was coming. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. I did not hold his hand. He was my hostage for the evening, bound by the absolute certainty that if he tried to run, the police would be waiting at the airport before he even cleared security. When the car pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel, the valet stepped forward to open my door. I stepped out onto the red carpet and the cool winter air wrapped around my bare shoulders. Photographers from local society magazines were stationed near the velvet ropes, snapping pictures of the city's elite as they arrived. I turned back toward the car and gave Terrence a look that left absolutely no room for negotiation. He climbed out heavily, his face ashen and completely drained of its usual arrogant charm. "Smile," I whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear my voice over the popping of the camera flashes. "You wanted to be the man of the house, Terrence. You wanted to sit at the head of the table. So stand up straight and play your part. If you embarrass me in front of these cameras, I will make sure the judge adds maximum penalty enhancements to your wire fraud charges." He swallowed hard, terrified into submission. He offered a rigid, trembling arm, and I slipped my hand through it, letting the photographers capture the image of a powerful, flawlessly united couple. I wore my midnight blue gown like a suit of armor, projecting an aura of absolute control. The grand ballroom was breathtaking. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of tables draped in heavy velvet. The room was filled with the most affluent, influential Black professionals in the state. Judges, surgeons, real estate moguls, and corporate executives mingled over champagne and classical jazz. It was a space where respectability politics reigned supreme, where reputations were treated like currency, and where family scandals were considered the ultimate social sin. It did not take me long to spot Malik and Chloe. They were standing near the towering ice sculpture at the far end of the room. The moment we crossed the threshold, Malik's eyes locked onto Terrence. The sheer raw hatred radiating from my brother-in-law was palpable even from 50 feet away. Malik was gripping a crystal champagne flute so tightly I expected the glass to shatter in his bare hand. He took a sudden aggressive step in our direction, his broad chest heaving beneath his suit jacket. Terrence stopped dead in his tracks, his hand shaking violently against my arm. He tried to take a step backward, attempting to hide behind me like a frightened child, but I dug my manicured nails into his sleeve, holding him firmly in place. Malik did not cross the room. He stopped himself, closing his eyes and taking a deep, rigid breath. He was trapped by the exact same societal rules Vivian had worshipped her entire life. He could not drag Terrence out of the ballroom by his collar and beat him for the identity theft, because doing so would create a massive ghetto spectacle in front of the very people he relied on for his own business connections. Malik was paralyzed by his desperate need to maintain his elite status. He glared daggers at his younger brother, sending a silent, unmistakable promise that the moment they were behind closed doors, blood would be drawn. Chloe, on the other hand, was operating on an entirely different wavelength. She had clearly abandoned her furious husband to work the room. I watched her weave through the crowd of wealthy donors wearing a pale pink evening gown that made her look deliberately fragile and unassuming. With the $40,000 stolen security deposit gone and her commercial property application outright rejected by my firm, Chloe was in desperate need of a financial lifeline. She needed a new investor for her fake wellness boutique, and she needed one tonight before her entire unearned lifestyle collapsed. I signaled a waiter, took a glass of sparkling water, and positioned myself near a towering floral arrangement that offered a clear, unobstructed view of the room. I watched Chloe hunt. It was fascinating to observe her tactics in real time. She was weaponizing her proximity to whiteness in a room full of affluent Black professionals, playing the role of the gentle progressive ally who had been tragically victimized. She approached small clusters of older wealthy couples, offering them a practiced, perfectly calibrated smile before letting her face fall into an expression of brave sorrow. She was feeding them a sob story. I did not need to hear the exact words to know exactly what she was saying. Her body language gave it all away. She was placing a delicate hand on her chest, shaking her head sadly and wiping away invisible tears. She was telling them that her dream business had been maliciously ripped away at the last second. She was undoubtedly framing me as the angry, aggressive sister-in-law who had destroyed her boutique out of pure, irrational jealousy. She was looking for a savior, someone with deep pockets who would write her a check out of pity just to spite the nasty family drama. I took a slow sip of my water, enjoying the absolute delusion of her strategy. Chloe excused herself from a group of local politicians and locked her sights on a woman standing near the silent auction tables. The woman was dressed in an impeccable emerald green pantsuit, holding a glass of bourbon and inspecting a charity catalog with sharp, discerning eyes. I smiled to myself, feeling a deep, genuine wave of satisfaction. Of all the people in this massive ballroom, Chloe had just selected the absolute worst possible target for her manipulative victim routine. The woman was Valerie. Valerie was not just a major donor. She was a self-made billionaire, the founder and chief executive officer of the national logistics firm, where I served as vice president. She was my direct mentor, the woman who had personally recruited me and taught me how to navigate the ruthless male-dominated world of corporate shipping. Valerie had grown up in the same rough South Side neighborhoods I had. She had built her empire from a single delivery truck. She despised weakness. She despised excuses. And above all else, she despised people who felt entitled to money they did not earn. More importantly, Valerie knew exactly what was happening in my personal life. I had called her from the bank earlier that afternoon to inform her that I would be utilizing my corporate expense card for the charity donation because my husband had attempted to hijack my personal accounts. Valerie knew all about Terrence's insecurities. She knew about Vivian's exhausting elitism, and she knew all about the sister-in-law who constantly expected handouts. I stepped slightly out from behind the floral arrangement, wanting a clear view of the execution. Chloe approached Valerie with that same practiced, fragile smile. I watched Chloe introduce herself, gesturing vaguely toward where Terrence and I were standing across the room. Valerie turned her head slightly, acknowledging me with a brief, imperceptible nod before returning her attention to Chloe. Chloe launched into her routine. She placed her hand over her heart, leaning in close to play the distressed entrepreneur. I watched Chloe's lips moving rapidly, painting herself as the dedicated wellness advocate whose brilliant business plan had been cruelly derailed by a vindictive family member. She was likely explaining how she just needed one visionary investor to step in and save her commercial lease. She was pouring it on thick, expecting Valerie to melt with maternal sympathy and open her checkbook. Valerie did not melt. Valerie did not offer a sympathetic smile. She did not reach out to comfort Chloe or offer words of encouragement. Valerie stood perfectly still, her posture radiating absolute, unyielding corporate authority. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her bourbon, her sharp eyes analyzing Chloe from the top of her blonde head down to her designer heels. She let the silence stretch, letting Chloe's desperate plea hang awkwardly in the air. Then Valerie shifted her weight, turning fully toward the younger woman. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the unmistakable weight of a woman who commanded thousands of employees. Even from a distance, I could see the exact moment Valerie's words struck their target. "You must be the parasite Kendra warned me about," Valerie said, her tone smooth, chilling, and utterly devoid of pity. Chloe's mouth dropped open. The fragile victim facade shattered, instantly replaced by genuine deer in the headlights' shock. She took a physical step backward, her face flushing a deep, humiliating shade of red. She tried to stammer out a response, trying to backtrack and salvage the interaction, but Valerie simply raised a single manicured hand, cutting her off completely. "Do not embarrass yourself further," Valerie told her loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "You are standing in a room full of people who actually built their wealth. You do not belong here. Go find your husband and prepare your financial records. I hear the Internal Revenue Service is quite thorough these days." Valerie turned her back on Chloe, completely dismissing her existence, and went right back to inspecting the silent auction catalog. Chloe stood there trembling in the center of the ballroom, publicly exposed and entirely rejected. She looked wildly around the room, realizing that her tears held absolutely no currency here. I raised my glass of sparkling water across the room, offering Chloe a silent mock toast. She caught my eye, and the sheer terror on her face told me everything I needed to know. The walls were closing in, and the main event had not even begun. I watched Chloe turn on her heel and flee toward the back corridors of the hotel. Her pale pink designer gown swished frantically around her ankles as she practically ran from Valerie's devastating dismissal. She bumped into a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes, but she did not even stop to apologize. She just kept running, desperate to escape the humiliating reality that her white tears held absolutely no currency in a room full of people who actually worked for their wealth. Terrence witnessed the entire exchange. His breathing grew even more ragged, and his chest heaved beneath his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket. He realized in that exact moment that my reach extended far beyond the walls of our suburban home. I was not just his wife. I was a highly respected executive with powerful allies who would crush him without a second thought. I dug my manicured fingers slightly deeper into his arm and guided him forward. We were seated at table number 1, right at the edge of the grand stage. It was the prime real estate Vivian always demanded for her family to ensure everyone in the city saw her sitting at the absolute center of power. We took our seats, and the sheer awkwardness at the table was magnificent. The other high society couples seated with us greeted Terrence with their usual warm smiles, expecting him to engage in the typical arrogant banter he always provided. Instead, he offered a sickly, trembling nod and stared blankly at his empty water glass. I smoothly took over the conversation, chatting effortlessly with a prominent local surgeon and his wife about a recent real estate development in the city. I played the role of the flawless, composed wife, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable grace. As the evening progressed and the first course was served, a palpable sense of confusion began to ripple through the ballroom. People were whispering behind their linen napkins. Where was Vivian? Normally, my mother-in-law treated the winter gala like her personal coronation. She would spend the first hour of the evening holding court near the grand entrance, kissing cheeks, accepting lavish compliments on her gown, and making sure every single donor acknowledged her presence. She lived for the spotlight, but tonight her designated seat at our table remained empty. The wealthy socialites around us began to exchange questioning glances, wondering if the grand matriarch of Atlanta society had fallen ill. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, knowing exactly where she was. Above the main ballroom sat a private VIP lounge, enclosed with tinted glass windows that overlooked the expansive floor below. Vivian was up there, hiding in the shadows. She was too utterly terrified to face Judge Harrison and the affluent board members after the absolute destruction I had unleashed in the country club boardroom earlier that afternoon. She knew they possessed the financial ledgers proving she was bankrupt and embezzling charity funds. Yet she was far too obsessed with her own image and the desperate need to control the narrative to actually leave the building. She was watching her kingdom from a dark, elevated cage, waiting for the execution she knew was inevitable. The waitstaff cleared the salad plates and brought out the main entree. I unfolded my napkin and ate my filet with genuine enjoyment. The food was excellent, and the taste of victory made it even better. Terrence did not touch a single bite of his meal. He stared at his plate, his hands shaking so violently in his lap that he had to grip his own knees to keep them still. He leaned toward me, pretending to whisper an affectionate remark into my ear for the benefit of the other couples at our table. "Kendra, please," he pleaded, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper. "Let me go to the restroom. I feel like I'm going to be sick. Just give me 5 minutes. I promise I will come right back." I turned my head slightly, keeping a pleasant, bright smile on my face so the surrounding guests would suspect nothing. "If you stand up from this chair, Terrence," I whispered back, my tone laced with ice, "I will stand up right next to you. I will project my voice so every single person at this table hears me, and I will loudly ask if you need to go to the bathroom to throw up because you are nervous about the grand larceny and wire fraud charges. I will ruin you before the dessert is even served. Sit up straight and drink your water." He sank back into his chair, completely paralyzed. He was a prisoner bound by the very societal rules of respectability his mother had drilled into him since birth. He could not make a scene. He could only sit there and wait for the hammer to drop. The house lights slowly dimmed, casting the outer edges of the ballroom in shadow. A single brilliant spotlight illuminated the grand stage at the front of the room. Judge Harrison approached the heavy mahogany podium. He adjusted the microphone and looked out over the sea of affluent, expectant faces. The room fell into a deep, respectful silence. The soft clinking of silverware stopped completely. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for all evening. The annual address where the executive board highlighted their philanthropic achievements, announced the fundraising totals, and officially confirmed the leadership for the upcoming year. According to the printed programs resting on every table, Vivian was scheduled to be announced as the returning chairwoman, and Terrence was scheduled to follow the judge with a presentation on the discretionary fund's financial health. Judge Harrison began his speech by thanking the major donors. He spoke eloquently about the importance of legacy, the unwavering strength of the Black community, and our collective responsibility to uplift the next generation of minority youth. He possessed a commanding, booming voice that commanded absolute authority. But as his speech progressed, his tone lacked its usual celebratory warmth. There was a heavy judicial gravity to his words that made the atmosphere in the ballroom grow uncomfortably still. We have always prided ourselves on operating with the highest standard of excellence and absolute transparency. Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying to the very back of the massive hall. We demand integrity from ourselves and from those we invite to sit at our tables. However, maintaining that standard requires us to face extremely difficult truths when our sacred trust is violated by those working from within. A murmur of confusion rippled through the front tables. Terrence gripped the edge of the tablecloth, his breathing hitching in his throat. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my eyes locked on the judge. Therefore, instead of moving forward with our scheduled leadership announcements, the executive board has convened an emergency session and implemented an immediate structural reorganization, Judge Harrison announced. The wealthy guests exchanged alarmed, shocked glances. The concept of a sudden structural reorganization at this level of society was unheard of. It signaled a massive internal scandal. People began turning their heads, looking up toward the tinted windows of the VIP lounge where Vivian was supposed to be stationed. Judge Harrison looked directly down at our table. He looked right at me, his expression filled with profound respect and somber gratitude. This dramatic reorganization is the direct result of severe financial discrepancies discovered within our scholarship discretionary fund. The judge declared, his words landing like heavy stones across the room. It is a deeply painful betrayal of our mission and a stain on the values we uphold. But this prestigious organization will survive today because of the unwavering integrity and the brilliant financial acumen of one of our own. We owe a profound permanent debt of gratitude to our esteemed colleague Kendra, who uncovered this deeply rooted corruption and acted swiftly to protect our community assets. The ballroom fell dead silent. A collective sharp gasp echoed through the cavernous space as hundreds of eyes turned to stare at me and then immediately shifted to Terrence sweating profusely beside me. The elite members of Atlanta society were calculating the math in real time. They knew Terrence was the auxiliary treasurer. They knew Vivian was the chairwoman. The implications of the judge's announcement hit the crowd like a shockwave. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and charged with dangerous electricity. Terrence looked like he was about to pass out, holding his chest and gasping for air. Then a loud, authoritative sound shattered the quiet. The heavy wooden double doors at the very back of the ballroom swung open with a resounding, violent crack. 4 uniformed police officers stepped inside the room. The heavy wooden double doors at the very back of the ballroom swung open with a resounding, violent crack. 4 uniformed police officers stepped inside the room. Their heavy boots thudded against the plush carpet, moving with a synchronized, undeniable authority. The collective gasp that swept through the ballroom was deafening. In the elite circles of Atlanta society, the presence of law enforcement at a black-tie charity gala was the ultimate unimaginable disgrace. It was the complete obliteration of the respectability politics Vivian had worshipped her entire life. The officers did not pause to speak to the event coordinators. They bypassed the silent auction tables and marched straight down the center aisle, guided by the unwavering gaze of Judge Harrison from the podium. They were heading directly for table number 1. The blood drained completely from Terrence's face, leaving him looking like a ghost trapped inside a custom-tailored tuxedo. The arrogant man who had smugly told me to submit to his financial guidance just hours ago was now visibly trembling. His survival instincts finally kicked in, overriding his fear of making a public scene. He scrambled backward, his chair screeching loudly against the polished dance floor. He bumped into the neighboring table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher that shattered into a dozen pieces. Terrence turned his back on the advancing officers and bolted toward the side exit near the catering kitchens. He was running like a complete coward, leaving me sitting at the table perfectly composed. But Terrence did not make it more than 10 feet. Malik had been standing near the ice sculpture, seething with a quiet, dangerous rage ever since I exposed the identity theft regarding the Porsche lease. Malik saw his younger brother making a break for the exit, and he moved with terrifying speed. He stepped right into Terrence's path, blocking the narrow walkway between the velvet-draped tables. Terrence slammed hard into his older brother's broad chest, bouncing backward. Malik moved. Terrence begged, his voice a high-pitched, frantic whisper. "Please let me get past you. I have to get out of here." Malik did not move a single inch. He reached out and grabbed Terrence by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo jacket, lifting him slightly off his feet. The veins in Malik's neck were bulging as he stared down at the brother who had forged his signature and destroyed his flawless credit score. "You are not running from this." Malik snarled, his deep voice carrying over the stunned silence of the ballroom. "You dragged my name into your mess, and you are going to stand here and take exactly what is coming to you." With a powerful, violent shove, Malik hurled Terrence backward. Terrence stumbled blindly and crashed right back into the empty chair at our table, falling directly into the path of the 4 police officers who had just arrived. The officers surrounded him instantly, cutting off any remaining avenues of escape. Terrence Henderson, the lead officer, announced, his voice booming with official authority. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and corporate embezzlement." The officer grabbed Terrence's arm and forced it behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent ballroom. The sound was crisp, clear, and absolutely devastating. It was the sound of a fake empire collapsing into dust. Terrence began to sob. He was weeping openly, crying out for his mother like a frightened child. He twisted his neck to look at me as the officers secured his wrists. "Kendra, please," he wailed, tears streaming down his face. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you authorized the transfer. You are my wife. You have to save me." I remained seated. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and took a slow, deliberate sip. I looked at this man I had supported, funded, and loved for 4 years, and I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no regret, no lingering affection. "I did not authorize anything, Terrence," I said, my voice perfectly steady, ensuring the officers and the wealthy guests at our table heard every single word. "You stole $40,000 from my bank account this morning, and you embezzled charity funds meant for minority youth. You did this to yourself." Suddenly, a shrill, piercing scream cut through the heavy atmosphere of the ballroom. Chloe came rushing forward from the back of the crowd. She saw the police officers, she saw the handcuffs, and she saw the flashing lights of the society photographers who had rushed inside to capture the spectacular downfall of the Henderson family. Chloe realized instantly that the ship was rapidly sinking into the ocean, and she had absolutely no intention of going down with it. She threw herself into her fragile victim routine, shifting gears with breathtaking speed. She stopped a few feet away from the police officers, throwing her hands up in the air and backing away from Terrence as if he were carrying a deadly disease. "I had nothing to do with this," Chloe yelled, making sure her voice projected to the wealthy donors and the cameras. She forced fresh tears to spill down her cheeks, playing to the affluent crowd. "Terrence told me that money was a legitimate business investment. I had absolutely no idea he stole the $40,000 from Kendra. He lied to me. He used my wellness boutique to hide his stolen money. I am a victim here too. I did not know anything about a grand larceny." Terrence stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second, staring at his sister-in-law in pure, unadulterated shock. The woman his family had coddled, accommodated, and worshipped for years was throwing him directly under the bus without a single moment of hesitation. Chloe was sacrificing him to save her own skin and whatever was left of her non-existent reputation. The officers ignored her theatrical performance. They pulled Terrence up by his arms and began marching him toward the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom. The flashbulbs from the cameras fired relentlessly, capturing the humiliating public exit of a man who thought he could steal from his wife and get away with it. Chloe stood near our table, weeping loudly into her hands, trying to garner sympathy from the shocked high society guests, watching the scene unfold. She was putting on a brilliant show, desperately hoping someone in the room would view her as a tragic collateral victim of a toxic family dispute. I set my water glass down on the table. I smoothed the heavy, luxurious fabric of my midnight blue evening gown and stood up. The cameras immediately turned toward me, capturing the image of the flawless, betrayed executive wife standing tall amid the ruins of her marriage. I did not look angry. I did not look devastated. I looked like absolute untouchable power. I walked slowly around the table, closing the distance between myself and Chloe. She lowered her hands slightly, looking at me through her fake tears, expecting me to yell or cause a scene that would validate her victimhood. I did not give her the satisfaction. I stepped directly into her personal space. I leaned in close, lowering my head so my lips were just inches from her ear. The cameras continued to flash, capturing the intimate, quiet moment between us. "Ignorance is not innocence, Chloe." I whispered, my voice a deadly silken thread that only she could hear. "Especially when your legal signature is stamped on the corporate registration for that limited liability company." I paused, letting the cold, hard reality of the law sink into her panicked mind. I let her process the fact that the stolen $40,000 had been wired directly into an account bearing her name. "The Internal Revenue Service audits start on Monday," I added softly. I pulled back and looked at her face. The fake tears vanished completely. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. Her knees buckled beneath the weight of her pink designer gown, and she slumped against the edge of the velvet-draped table just to keep herself from hitting the floor. Chloe slid completely down the edge of the velvet-draped table until she hit the polished hardwood floor of the ballroom. She sat there in her expensive pale pink gown, clutching her knees to her chest and staring blankly ahead. Her fabricated victim narrative had been entirely dismantled in less than 60 seconds. The realization that she was legally tied to a fraudulent commercial entity and staring down the barrel of a federal tax audit had completely short-circuited her brain. The society photographers ignored her collapsed form and turned their lenses back toward the center aisle where the real spectacle was unfolding. The 4 uniformed police officers were adjusting their grip on Terrence, securing his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic clicking of the handcuffs echoed through the silent, cavernous room. Terrence was weeping openly, his chest heaving as he begged the officers to listen to him. I was blubbering about a misunderstanding, claiming he had every intention of putting the money back. The lead officer did not entertain a single word of his pathetic excuses. He simply grabbed Terrence by the bicep and turned him toward the exit. Up until this exact moment, Vivian had remained hidden. She had been cowering in the shadows of the elevated VIP lounge, desperately avoiding the affluent board members she knew were furious with her. But the commotion on the main floor had grown too loud to ignore. The heavy glass doors of the VIP lounge suddenly burst open. Vivian stepped out onto the landing of the grand sweeping staircase that connected the lounge to the main ballroom. She was wearing a shimmering gold evening gown, designed to make her look like the absolute queen of Atlanta society. She gripped the marble banister and looked down at the sea of wealthy donors. Then her eyes locked onto the center aisle. She saw the police officers, she saw the flashing cameras, and she saw her golden child, her precious youngest son, standing in a custom-tailored tuxedo, with his hands locked firmly behind his back. The shock hit Vivian with the force of a physical blow. Her perfectly manicured composure, the aristocratic facade she had spent decades meticulously cultivating, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The color drained from her face entirely. For a split second, she stood frozen on the landing, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Then she moved. She hiked up the heavy fabric of her gold gown and practically ran down the sweeping marble staircase. She was shoving past prominent surgeons and local politicians, abandoning every single rule of high society etiquette she had ever preached to me. She pushed through the dense crowd of onlookers, her designer heels slipping on the polished floor. "What are you doing?" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. "Get your hands off my son! You are making a terrible mistake. Do you have any idea who we are? We are the Henderson family. You cannot just march into a private charity gala and assault my son. She broke through the front line of the crowd and threw herself toward the police officers. Two of the officers immediately stepped forward, forming a physical barricade to block her path. They held up their hands, warning her to step back, but Vivian was completely blinded by her own arrogance. She honestly believed that her perceived social status granted her immunity from the law. "Ma'am, step back right now," the lead officer commanded, his voice carrying a hard, absolute authority. "Your son is under arrest for grand larceny and corporate embezzlement. Do not interfere with this process, or you will be detained as well." Vivian gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. She looked at Terrence, who was openly sobbing and shaking his head. "Mom, please help me," Terrence wailed, his voice breaking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "They are taking me to jail. Tell them to stop. Tell them it was your idea." The lead officer ignored the exchange entirely. He looked directly at Terrence and began reciting the words that signaled the absolute end of the Henderson family dynasty. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer stated, his voice echoing clearly across the dead-silent ballroom. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Vivian watched in absolute horror as her son was read his Miranda rights in front of the entire black elite of Atlanta. The wealthy donors, the board members she had tried to manipulate, the politicians she had courted for favors. They were all watching her legacy burn to ashes. The flashing lights of the society photographers captured every single agonizing second of her humiliation. Vivian slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. I was still standing near table number 1, my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely serene. I was wearing the midnight blue evening gown that made me look like absolute untouchable power. The realization hit her like a freight train. She understood in that exact moment that I had orchestrated this entire public execution. I had not just frozen the accounts and reported the theft. I had deliberately forced Terrence to attend this gala, knowing the police were coming. I had engineered a scenario where her deepest, darkest shame would be broadcast to the very people she worshipped. Vivian completely lost her mind. The elitist matriarch who loved to lecture me about respectability politics and the importance of maintaining old money decorum devolved into a feral, screaming animal. "You did this!" Vivian shrieked, her face contorting into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. "You vicious and grateful little girl. You destroyed my family. You destroyed my legacy. I gave you everything and you ruined my son's life out of pure spite." She lunged at me. She threw her entire body weight forward, her hands curled into claws aiming directly for my face. I did not flinch. I did not step backward. I did not even raise my hands to defend myself. I knew I did not have to. Before Vivian could even close half the distance between us, the private security detail hired for the gala intercepted her. Two massive security guards wearing dark suits grabbed her by the arms and hauled her backward. Vivian thrashed violently against their grip, kicking her designer heels and screaming at the top of her lungs. She was creating the exact kind of loud ghetto spectacle she had always falsely accused me of exhibiting. The irony was absolutely magnificent. "Let me go!" Vivian screamed, struggling against the security guards. "I will kill you, Kendra. I will make sure you never show your face in this city again. You are nothing but a common street girl. You do not belong here." The entire ballroom watched in collective disgust. The affluent women who had previously entertained Vivian's garden parties were covering their mouths and shaking their heads. They were witnessing the true, unhinged nature of a woman who had spent her entire life pretending to be better than everyone else. Then a deep, booming voice cut through the chaos. "That is enough, Vivian." Judge Harrison, the president of the Executive Charity Board, stepped down from the grand stage. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture radiating profound judicial authority. The crowd parted instantly to let him through. He walked past the police officers who were leading a sobbing Terrence out of the room. He did not even glance at the younger man. He walked directly up to Vivian, who was still breathing heavily against the firm grip of the security guards. Judge Harrison looked at her with an expression of deep, absolute pity. It was the same look he had given her in the country club boardroom earlier that afternoon. "You have disgraced yourself, Vivian," the judge said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet room. "You have disgraced this organization, and you have disgraced the community we are sworn to protect. You stand here screaming about legacy, while the police escort your son away for stealing scholarship funds meant for minority youth. You have no legacy left. Vivian stopped struggling. The cold, hard finality in the judge's voice pierced through her hysterical rage. She looked at him, her chest heaving, tears tracking through her expensive makeup. "Judge Harrison, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You know me, you know my family." "I know a thief when I see one," the judge replied smoothly. "And I know that you no longer belong in our company." Judge Harrison extended his right-hand palm facing upward. He looked directly into Vivian's terrified eyes. "Give me your pin, Vivian," he demanded. The request sent a physical shockwave through Vivian's body. Every member of the executive charity board wore a custom-designed solid gold lapel pin encrusted with a small diamond. It was the ultimate symbol of their rank, their prestige, and their untouchable status within Atlanta society. Vivian wore hers pinned proudly to the bodice of her gold evening gown. Taking the pin was the societal equivalent of a military demotion. It was a public stripping of her rank. "No," Vivian gasped, clutching her hand over the gold pin on her chest. "You cannot do this. I earned my place here." "You forfeited your place the moment you decided to embezzle from our children." The judge countered, his voice hardening into steel. "Hand over the pin. Vivian, or I will have security remove it from your dress for you. Do not make this any more humiliating than it already is." Vivian looked around the room. She looked at the wealthy donors, the politicians, and the socialites. She was looking for a single sympathetic face. She found absolutely no one. Every person in the room was staring at her with cold, undeniable rejection. She was completely isolated. With trembling, defeated hands, Vivian reached up to the bodice of her gown. She fumbled with the clasp, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely undo the safety catch. She finally pulled the gold pin free and placed it into the center of Judge Harrison's waiting palm. The judge closed his hand around the pin and stepped aside, clearing the path to the exit. "Remove her from the premises," he instructed the security guards, "and ensure she never crosses the threshold of any property affiliated with this board ever again." The security guards adjusted their grip on her arms and began walking her toward the side exit. Vivian did not fight them this time. She did not scream or make any more threats. Her head hung low, her shoulders slumped, and her gold gown dragged heavily across the carpet. She looked exactly like what she was, a broken, bankrupt fraud who had finally been exposed to the light. I watched the heavy doors close behind her, sealing her permanent exile from the world she loved more than anything else. I stood in the center of the ballroom, completely untouched by the wreckage of the Henderson family. I had executed my plan with absolute precision. Terrence was in handcuffs. Chloe was facing an audit. Malik was furious, and Vivian had been banished. The slate was completely wiped clean. 1 month had passed since the flashing lights of the police cruisers illuminated the grand entrance of the charity gala. 1 month since Vivian was escorted out of her elite sanctuary, and Terrence was shoved into the back of a squad car in his custom tuxedo. You would think that spending a night in a holding cell and facing multiple federal felony charges would humble a man. You would think that having your entire fake empire exposed to the city's elite would force a person to reflect on their choices and accept their inevitable downfall. You would be entirely wrong. The air inside the Fulton County Courthouse was stale and heavy, but I breathed it in like it was crisp mountain oxygen. I walked through the metal detectors wearing a tailored ivory suit that projected absolute untouchable confidence. My attorney Sterling walked right beside me, carrying a heavy leather briefcase that contained the absolute financial ruin of my soon-to-be ex-husband. We entered the courtroom and took our seats at the petitioner's table. Terrence was already sitting at the defense table across the aisle. He was out on bail, but the profound stress of the impending criminal trials had visibly aged him 5 years in 30 days. He was wearing a suit that looked slightly too big for his shrinking frame. He kept his eyes glued to the scuffed wooden table, refusing to look in my direction. Beside him sat his divorce attorney, a slick, fast-talking man named Garrison, who carried himself with the unearned bravado of a lawyer who clearly believed he could bully his way to a lucrative settlement. Garrison had built his career on aggressive litigation and exploiting high-earning spouses, but he had absolutely no idea what kind of buzzsaw he was walking into today. Judge Rollins took the bench. She was a no-nonsense black woman with sharp, observant eyes and a reputation for tearing through legal nonsense with ruthless efficiency. She called the session to order, and Garrison immediately stood up to deliver his opening statement. It was a speech so deeply disconnected from reality that I actually had to press my lips together to keep from laughing out loud. Garrison painted Terrence as a devoted, supportive husband who had selflessly sacrificed his own earning potential in the competitive automotive industry to manage our household. He claimed Terrence had taken on the domestic burdens so that I could freely climb the corporate ladder at my logistics firm. Garrison spoke passionately about the lifestyle Terrence had grown accustomed to over our 4-year marriage, arguing that my substantial wealth was a direct result of the emotional and practical support Terrence had provided behind the scenes. Then Garrison formally laid out their demands. He requested 50% of my remaining investment portfolios. He demanded the deed to the 4-bedroom suburban home I had purchased entirely with my own money before we were even married. And as the absolute pinnacle of his audacity, he requested $15,000 a month in temporary spousal support to ensure Terrence would not face financial hardship during the divorce proceedings. Terrence actually sat up a little straighter as his lawyer spoke, seemingly empowered by the ridiculous fictional narrative Garrison was spinning to the court. I did not react. I did not shake my head or roll my eyes. I simply looked at Sterling. Sterling stood up, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and approached the center of the courtroom. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform for the gallery. He simply opened his leather briefcase and began placing heavily tabbed file folders directly in front of the judge. Your Honor. Sterling began, his voice smooth and surgical. Opposing counsel has painted a lovely picture of a supportive spouse. Unfortunately, that picture is entirely fraudulent. Mr. Henderson did not sacrifice his career to support my client's corporate ascension. Mr. Henderson utilized my client's success as a shield to fund a sophisticated criminal enterprise and maintain a fabricated lifestyle. Sterling opened the first file. He laid out the official police report and the grand larceny charges currently pending against Terrence. He provided the certified bank records showing Terrence draining our $40,000 joint checking account at 9 in the morning on the exact same day he maliciously locked my credit card. He traced the wire transfer directly to the commercial limited liability company owned by his sister-in-law, Chloe. Judge Rollins frowned, peering down at the highlighted routing numbers. Sterling did not stop there. He opened the second file. He submitted the active police report filed by Malik regarding the devastating identity theft. He presented the fraudulent dealership documents proving Terrence had forged his own brother's signature and used his immaculate credit history to lease the luxury Porsche he had been parading around town in. And finally, Sterling delivered the absolute killing blow. He placed the comprehensive audit reports from the charity's discretionary fund onto the bench. He detailed the ongoing federal and local investigations into the embezzlement scheme, outlining exactly how Terrence had manipulated the quarterly expense reports and created phantom vendor invoices to funnel $80,000 directly to his mother's country club account. My client does not owe Mr. Henderson a single dime of spousal support, Sterling concluded, stepping back from the bench. Mr. Henderson is not a dependent spouse suffering from a disparity in income. He is an active predator who attempted to bleed my client dry while systematically stealing from minority youth scholarships. We respectfully request that all demands for support and asset division be dismissed with extreme prejudice. Garrison was completely speechless. The slick, aggressive lawyer looked at his client with wide, horrified eyes, realizing Terrence had conveniently forgotten to mention the mountain of federal and local felony charges pending against him. Terrence sank so low in his chair he practically slid under the defense table. Judge Rollins flipped through the thick stack of documented evidence. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. Her expression shifted from standard judicial neutrality to absolute unvarnished disgust. She took off her reading glasses and looked down at Terrence as if he were something foul she had scraped off the bottom of her shoe. "Mr. Henderson, the judge," said her voice ringing like a cracked whip. "The audacity required to stand in my courtroom and demand $15,000 a month from a woman you actively terrorized and stole from is truly breathtaking. You did not support her career. You weaponized her bank accounts to fund a pathetic illusion of wealth. Judge Rollins picked up her gavel. The request for spousal support is denied immediately, she declared. The request for asset in regarding the marital home and the investment portfolios is denied. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate and total freeze on all of your independent financial accounts, Mr. Henderson. Any remaining liquid assets under your name will be seized and held in a court-mandated escrow account to ensure restitution is paid to the charity board and to replenish the funds you stole from your wife. She slammed the gavel down with a sharp, definitive crack. We are adjourned. Terrence was left sitting at the defense table, completely bankrupt, legally cornered, and utterly destroyed. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Garrison snapped his briefcase shut and walked away from his own client without saying a single word, entirely disgusted by the situation. I gathered my designer bag, thanked Sterling for his flawless execution, and walked out through the heavy wooden double doors into the wide marble hallway of the courthouse. I felt lighter than I had in 4 years. The massive toxic weight of the Henderson family had finally been completely severed from my life. As I stepped into the corridor, I saw Malik standing near the bank of elevators. He was wearing a dark suit, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression hard and unreadable. Terrence stumbled out of the courtroom a few seconds behind me. He looked up and saw his older brother standing there. A pathetic glimmer of hope flashed across Terrence's exhausted face. Despite the identity theft, despite the physical altercation in my living room a month ago, Terrence still believed the toxic rules of family loyalty would save him. I took a hesitant step toward Malik, opening his mouth to speak, to beg for help or a place to stay since his assets were now entirely frozen by the judge. But Malik did not even acknowledge Terrence. He did not look at him. He did not yell or throw a punch. Malik simply walked right past his younger brother as if Terrence were completely invisible. Malik walked straight up to Chloe. She had been sitting on a wooden bench further down the hallway, waiting for the hearing to end. She was wearing a modest beige dress, playing the role of the supportive, quiet wife, trying desperately to distance herself from the IRS audits that were currently tearing her stolen boutique plans to shreds. Malik did not cause the scene. He did not raise his voice to create a public spectacle. He simply reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick manila folder, and dropped it directly into Chloe's lap. They were divorce papers. 3 months passed with the quiet, steady rhythm of absolute peace. I stood in the center of the massive commercial property I had purchased through my blind trust. This was the exact premium real estate Chloe had desperately tried to secure using the $40,000 Terrence stole from my bank account. She had envisioned a frivolous, crystal-infused wellness boutique designed to cater to bored, affluent housewives. She wanted to build a vanity project funded entirely by my stolen labor. I had an entirely different vision for the space. I transformed the sprawling, empty warehouse into a state-of-the-art community logistics training center. I funded the entire renovation using the corporate bonuses I had safely secured far away from the greedy hands of the Henderson family. The facility featured rows of modern computer stations, interactive training modules, and wide collaborative workspaces. We partnered directly with my logistics firm to offer fully funded certification programs for minority youth across the city. This was what actual Black excellence looked like. It was not about forging signatures to lease luxury cars or embezzling from charity funds to pay country club dues. It was about reaching down and pulling the next generation up the ladder. Today was the official grand opening of the center, and the atmosphere inside the building was nothing short of electric. The room was packed to absolute capacity. Local politicians, city council members, and journalists mingled near the front entrance, taking photographs of the sleek, modern facility. The catering staff circulated with silver trays of appetizers and sparkling cider. The energy was vibrant and triumphant. The most prominent attendees were the elite members of the charity board, the very same affluent individuals who had witnessed my country club showdown with Vivian were now standing in my building, treating me with profound, unvarnished respect. They no longer viewed me as just a successful corporate executive. They saw me as a formidable powerhouse who protected her community and refused to be compromised. Judge Harrison stood near the central podium wearing a sharp gray suit. He approached me with a warm, genuine smile and extended his hand. I shook it firmly. He told me that the charity board had completely restructured its financial oversight protocols thanks to the evidence I provided. He expressed his deep gratitude for my courage in exposing the embezzlement. He admitted that the board had been blinded by the illusion of legacy families and old money prestige. He assured me that moving forward, merit and transparency would be the only metrics they valued. I thanked the judge and told him I looked forward to serving on the new oversight committee. My mentor Valerie commanded the room with her usual effortless authority. She was dressed in a striking tailored crimson suit, holding a glass of sparkling cider, and speaking with the first cohort of students enrolled in the training program. The young men and women wore crisp, branded polo shirts, their faces glowing with pride and ambition. Valerie walked over to me and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. She told me I had taken a pile of ashes and built a fortress. She said the logistics firm was preparing to offer me an executive partnership by the end of the fiscal year. The validation from a self-made billionaire who truly understood my journey meant more to me than any fake societal status Vivian could have ever offered. As the afternoon transitioned into early evening, the formal speeches concluded and the crowd began to gradually thin out. The golden hour sunlight filtered through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the busy commercial street outside. I stepped away from the remaining guests, taking a quiet moment to simply observe the beautiful, thriving space I had created. I stood near the glass watching the heavy city traffic and the pedestrians walking along the wide concrete sidewalks. Then a specific figure caught my attention. Walking down the opposite side of the bustling street was an older woman. Her posture was hunched and her steps were slow and labored. She was not wearing a custom silk scarf or a shimmering gold evening gown. She wore a faded tan trench coat over plain, inexpensive clothing. Her hair, previously maintained by high-end stylists every week, was tied back in a messy, practical knot. She was carrying 2 heavy plastic grocery bags from a discount supermarket, struggling slightly under their weight. It was Vivian, the absolute matriarch of Atlanta society. The woman who had demanded my financial submission and plotted my ruin was now navigating the public sidewalk on foot. Her luxurious estate had been officially auctioned off by the bank weeks ago. Her beloved Mercedes had been repossessed shortly after her son was indicted for federal wire fraud. She had been completely exiled from the wealthy elite circles she worshipped and forced to move into a tiny, modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. She was currently walking toward the public bus stop at the corner of the intersection. I stood perfectly still behind the thick glass window watching her painful reality unfold. Vivian paused near the crosswalk, setting the heavy plastic grocery bags down on the concrete for a brief moment to catch her breath. She turned her head to look across the busy street. Her eyes landed directly on my building. She saw the bright professional signage displaying the name of the new Community Logistics Center. She saw the sleek, modern interior, illuminated by the warm overhead lights. She saw the wealthy, respected board members and local politicians mingling happily inside. And then she saw me. I was standing right behind the glass, wearing a flawless ivory pantsuit, radiating absolute, undeniable power. We locked eyes across the distance of the busy street. The physical barrier of the glass separated my thriving empire from her complete devastation. In that brief, agonizing moment, Vivian realized that she was staring at the exact commercial space her white daughter-in-law had desperately tried to secure. She realized that I had taken the very foundation of their stolen dreams and turned it into my own monument of success. The look on Vivian's face was a portrait of profound, inescapable shame. The arrogant, aristocratic pride that had defined her entire existence was completely gone. Her lower lip trembled and her shoulders sagged under the crushing weight of her spectacular failure. She could not hold my gaze for more than a few seconds. She looked down at the concrete, picked up her cheap plastic grocery bags, and quickly turned her face away. She shuffled hurriedly toward the bus stop, blending into the faceless crowd of weary commuters, disappearing entirely from my world. The grand opening event finally wrapped up an hour later. I personally thanked the catering staff, the journalists, and the remaining board members as they exited through the front doors. Valerie gave me one last brief hug before stepping into her waiting town car. I walked through the quiet, empty facility, ensuring the training modules were powered down and the security systems were fully engaged. I stepped out through the rear exit, locking the heavy steel deadbolt behind me. I walked across the private paved lot toward my vehicle. The evening air was cool and refreshing, carrying the distant sounds of the city skyline. I reached into my pocket and pressed the button on my key fob. My luxury sedan chirped twice, its sleek headlights illuminating the dark pavement. I walked up to the car and ran my hand lightly along the smooth metallic frame. It belonged entirely to me. There were no joint checking accounts left to monitor. There were no fraudulent leases tied to my address. There were no fake family ties dictating my schedule or demanding my submission. The toxic, suffocating weight of the Henderson family had been completely, permanently severed from my life. I was no longer an automated teller machine for leeches who disguised their greed as family loyalty. I opened the door, slid into the plush driver's seat, and closed the world outside. The interior of the car was perfectly silent. I sat there for a moment, gripping the leather steering wheel, taking a deep, cleansing breath. I reflected on the vicious cycle of financial abuse that so many successful Black women are expected to silently endure. Society conditions us to carry the burdens of insecure men. We are told to shrink ourselves to protect their fragile egos. We are told to fund their illusions of grandeur and accept their disrespect in the name of keeping the family together. Terrence and Vivian had relied entirely on that toxic cultural expectation. They thought because I was quiet and accommodating that I was fundamentally weak. They severely mistook my patience for compliance. They believed my willingness to compromise meant I was blind to their manipulation. They failed to understand that a quiet woman is often the most dangerous person in the room. I did not need to throw a tantrum, break dishes, or scream in the streets to reclaim my power. I simply needed to gather my receipts, secure my assets, and let the heavy hand of the law do the brutal work for me. I pushed the ignition button, and the powerful engine roared to life, wrapping me in a steady, comforting hum. I shifted the car into drive and pulled smoothly out of the private lot, heading toward my beautiful, peaceful home. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not screaming. It is letting them dig their own graves and simply handing them the shovel. The greatest lesson from this ordeal is that toxic family loyalty should never cost you your peace, your dignity, or your financial security. Blood does not give anyone the right to bleed you dry. For too long, society has conditioned successful women to shrink themselves to protect the fragile egos of insecure partners. True power is recognizing your worth, quietly gathering your receipts, and letting the law handle the rest. Never mistake our deep patience for blind compliance. Share your personal story about removing toxic family members to protect your peace in the comments below. Please like and subscribe today.